that I introduce Tze-ki Hon from City University of Hong Kong. As you've seen, so this yesterday afternoon we had a panel focusing specifically on China, and this morning we had a panel that was more broadly treating Asia with Vietnam, China, and Japan. And of course, this is one of the major differences with the 75th anniversary, which is that 25 years ago, the relationship or the weight, obviously, of Japan or China on the world scene, in some ways would have pushed us to think a little bit differently about what many have referred to as the failures of 1919. And now the radical shift in just the weight of China in just 25 years in world politics, also in scholarship, is in many ways forces, and this is one of the things that Albert and I discussed quite a bit, it really forces a fundamental rethinking of the impact of 1919. And we go from a kind of Japan that fails to impose the racial equality aspect, and in many ways is already a part of the major players in the conference, and China leaving and playing the politics of an empty chair, to all of the sudden, well, May 4th, 1919, having a new significance in the history of China, and as we heard yesterday and we'll hear now, having perhaps much more of an importance than we had previously estimated. So Professor Tze-ki Hon specializes in classical studies and intellectual history. He has a tremendous breadth. He's written 4 books, co-edited 4 collections of essays, covering such topics as commentaries on the famous Book of Changes, the I Ching, Neo-Confucianism of the Song Ming period, and more recently, the social and intellectual history of modern China and the global order after World War I. In the last decade, he has been a visiting research fellow at Leiden University in Holland and at Erlangen-Nuremberg University in Germany. His current research projects are increasingly looking at questions of World War, the sort of contemporary order that emerged out of World War I, and is leading to a series of exciting articles and collections. And so thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing your talk entitled The Meaning of the 1919 Moment in China, Sovereignty, Connectivity, and National Awakening. Thank you.
We're waiting for the activity. Oh, great. The title, The Meanings of 1919 Moments in China. As you know from yesterday, the panels, the 1990 moment in China is not the First World War, it's that Versailles settlement. Especially one settlement is about the transferring Shandong to Japanese. And that triggered the May 4 movements. So in other words, the trick here, the meanings, is the 1990 moment is the meanings of how the May 4 movement evolved, and the double and the multiple meanings of that. And I use 3 major concepts to kind of bring them together, sovereignty, connectivity, and national awakening. And also I try to kind of tie with the 2 panels, the panel yesterday and also the panel today, in relation to East Asia. So that kind of run up the conference that way. First and foremost, let's kind of go back to this, the beginning of the our conference. You all remember Adam Too's famous line. Okay, this is the order. Okay, everybody inclusive, and then you have these 3 old men dictating the term for the order. And in his way, okay, the whole issue is why is that this kind of discrepancy between the inclusiveness and then the exclusiveness in this event? And that actually led to the May 4 movement. There are two meanings to May 4 movement. I think Peter Zero in the audience is expert of that. He wrote a beautiful chapter on the meanings of May 4 movement as an event, as an era. And this is an event, one day they shook the world. May 4th, 1919, student movement moving along in the Beijing and then protesting against the Versailles settlements. And that actually triggered a long memory, okay? And as you all know, it's in France, okay? Pierre Nora have this beautiful argument that history is connected with memories. In a way, past is never passé because through memory, reproductions of memory, and our mind change in according with the circumstances. And that's so beautiful about history is that the past is never passé, but the past actually not past at all because it's a living. And this is the event that every year, May 4th, no matter you are in Beijing or you're in other places in China or around the world, among Chinese communities, there's a reason to remember that day. And there are double meaning, multiple meanings of that. And the first meaning is the May 4th as a political movement, nationalistic. Try to revive the sovereignty of China that was first given away to Germans and then later on German took over by the Japanese. And actually remember that the whole First World War, when it took place in Asia, Asia was not directly impacted by the war. East Asia actually benefited from the absence of the European powers, the leveling of the playing field. So both Japan and China actually bloomed during this time because of the absence of the other major powers. So this 1919 is a shock in a way. So if we talk about moment, there are two moments in the memory of the Chinese about the Versailles settlement. One is, of course, the Wilsonian moment. Mandela have said very carefully that at the end of 1918 to the beginning of 1919, there's this euphoria around the world, not only in East Asia, but also in India, Egypt, and so on and so forth, about a possibility of a new social political order, global order, in which there will be equality, in which open to all different countries based on self-determination. But that moment, actually, later on, okay, followed by another moment. Margaret here. I'm using the term that this is a peace conference moment. The moment is, to the East Asian is a totally dissatisfaction, frustrations and anguish, because then they find out that the global order may be leveled in terms of self-determination according to Woodrow Wilson. But yet, above that, there's also a circle, a small circles of powers that controlling who are in, who are out, who are giving more power, who are giving less. And the case of Shandong, why it's so controversial is that China is on the winning side. So they should be rewarded by that. But then you're not, and then in deciding the future of this Shandong, Qingdao, actually, by the way, Qingdao is known for beer. So, I don't know. And it's a German colony, and therefore this is a German beer, perhaps. That Qingdao, okay, it was occupied by Germany for quite some time in the late half of the 19th century. And then during the First World War, the Japanese attacked it and they occupied it. And then some of Germans actually put in the prison camp, including one of the famous scholar, Victor Wilhelm, who translated I Ching when he was in the prison camp. And then that is a beautiful circumstance for me as a cultural historian. But from the Chinese perspective, if it is indeed the China is on the winning side, then the Qingdao should have been given from Japanese to China. And that is simply logical. But yet, at the Versailles settlement, without consulting even the Chinese delegates, the decision was made that way. That's why this is this protest. And asking the delegates there to stop signing the contract, the settlement, and even leave the conference. So that is in other words, that memory, that day, okay, using Peter Zero, the May 4th event is an event of radical movement, student protest. And that's why I link to the memory of Beida, Beijing University. It's a Beida student under the much more kind of benevolent ruler of the governorship of Cai Yuanpei, they rush. They organize that. So Beijing University have this kind of a link with May 4th as a radicalism, as a nationalism, as a way to get back sovereignty. But you also have this, okay? Jeff Rosenstrom showed that yesterday. This is interesting too, okay? It's not a picture, a photograph of the past. It's a memory, okay, pianora. Is a reconstruction of the time, and then through painting to see, to depict another May 4th. Okay, this, in other words, that the May 4th radical movement is one thing. There's still radicalism here. Okay, you have people moving on. So if you follow the social Darwinism, this is the linear progression. So you have this moving forward. Okay. But the problem is that, okay, you also have this returning back of the abolished and equal treaty. So this is historically correct in relation to that event. But now you have the problem is that there's a couple of women here, okay? There's not many women students at the time, not even in Beida. So that's a problem here. And the number two is that the cinema is very orderly. Okay, you have the separation between, you have women, you have a student. You also have some of these people, okay, these peasants, okay? That is problematic too, because the May 4th event was basically a student movement. It was not a collaborative movement among different social classes. Later on, we moved to Shanghai, and maybe including some workers. So this is, in some way, it's not entirely historical, but historical in one sense, because the May 4th later on gained another meaning, cultural enlightenment. In other words, enlightening people to wake up to the demand of the time, and then they move a long time. For those who have read my article, that this is the issue about the hierarchy of time, vis-a-vis hierarchy of power. In other words, before this, you have this long history in the late Qing period, and also including Meiji too, of this reform, trying to make Asia look like European. To achieve, to go to this civilization, the standard civilization. So the standard civilization is that you must, like Japanese, eat beef. For Chinese, is that we will get that later, is to unbound the women's feet. So the women here is important, by the way. This is a tremendously important. Not in the sense of feminism per se, but also using feminism as a vehicle to critique the entire patrilineal family system of Confucianism. So the May 4th, in the other way, 五四, okay, if the Chinese say 五四, whenever they say 五四, May 4th, you don't know what they mean. You have to kind of talk about with them first and then see what they really mean. 五四, as this new culture movement, is actually a very complicated process. It includes, first of all, a new language, changing from the 文言文, the classical Chinese, into vernacular. It's a language reform. It's also a literary reform. This is Lu Xun. This is a writer that representing a new kinds of writing. That novelist is not just a writer. Novelists actually participate in social changes such that it becomes a symbol of social activism. Okay? So in other words, you have a new culture movement is changing the soul, the psyche, the national culture of the country, so the country can become modern. So now you have this, that's the whole point of my talk today, is that you have these two kinds of May 4th. May 4th as an event, May 4th as a movement, a new culture movement. And then these two actually do not coincide. One is radicalism, nationalism, sovereignty. Another one actually is to follow the linear time of progress. And to give you some background, is that for linear time for the Chinese, that like all over the world, there's a three-part divisions in terms of human development: hunting and gathering society, feudalism, and then industrial society. And then in each stage, there's a particular social political structure. So hunting and gathering is a tribal society. Feudalism is basically an empire system, imperial system. And then industrial society is a nation state. That's why the quest for China at the time, and also for Japan, is to make the country into a nation state. And Meiji Japan is clearly an example in the sense that reinventing the imperial symbol of the emperor as the father of the country to knit Japan into a modern state. China go the opposite by abolishing the imperial dynasty to establish nation state. Their path may be diverse, but the goal is the same, is to reach nation states. And this is how we come up to the cultural modernity embodied in the Enlightenment is actually part and parcel of what we call the Chinese modernity. Back to this development of Shanghai into a port, Guangzhou as a port. And then from there you have this women. It's a new women in the sense that, okay, because number one, they're no longer foot binding, okay? And then also they're Western. Some of them actually went abroad to the United States to study. The Song family, the three sisters, is a case in point. Three of them all went to the United States and all studied with fluent English. And they all married to good husbands, okay? Sun Yat-sen, Jiang Jieshi, and so on and so forth, okay? And that is the way. So the way, in other words, this called 五四力 women, okay, new culture women. And a novelist, actual writer, Hu Shi, wrote an article using the Ibsen as an example, the Nora. They're Nora, okay, I leave town, I leave home, I do my own way, okay? And that kind of so you have this conflation. Wu Si as May 4th as an event is about national self-determination. But May 4th as a cultural movement is about self-liberation. And now you have problems. Okay, this is collective. It's about the national path. The national path have to coincide with the global path. You have two time, national time coincide with the global time. Here it's about individual liberty, and then through that change society. And first and foremost, change the whole culture first. The Confucian culture, the patrilineal family system, and more importantly, patriarchy. And that's why the whole issue is about not only about foot binding, but also about concubinage. So one has to be one husband and one wife, rather than one husband, multiple partners, sexual partners. It is from the bottom up. There's a new May 4th as a cultural movement. And May 4th, the national movement is the bottom down. And that is these two motifs that we have talked about, have kind of discussed today. Because they're not, they can be conflated. One can argue that you can use the great learning of Confucianism, start with individual, family, and then society, and then nation. Then you can combine the two. But in actual practices, however, they are conflicting. And that is go back to Adam's argument, Adam Tooze. This is also the Versailles settlements. It's both inclusive and exclusive. The paradox is that this paradox actually implied in the May 4th. Even though the Versailles settlement is about foreign policy, international relations, national sovereignty, but it also integrated and embodied in this memory of that event / cultural movements. In that way, that's what my paper is about, is to situate this meaning of 1919 or 1990 moment in three different motifs or times. Before this moment, there was a golden age. In this way, I try to tie the panel of yesterday with the panel today, especially that the panel today include Vietnam and also Japan, is that before this 1919, there was a emergence of of East Asian modernity, China and Japan. Both of them, even though they have different paths, they want nation states. And then they modernize it, like the Industrial Revolution. They also have a shipping industry, and shipping line particularly. You have a Shanghai Kobe line that's strict, organized by the Japanese company, competing with Jardine and Madison. So in that way, you have this kind of a East Asian modernity that is rooted in East Asia, regional, okay, but yet is also global. And part of the panel that yesterday is about the globalization, circulations of ideas from Malaysia, from Paris to Malaysia, and then from other places, from Chinese to overseas Chinese communities. What we know is that you understand what we call this Versailles settlement, the meaning of Versailles settlement or the Mayfair movement. We have to understand it have to be understood globally, regionally, nationally, socially, and then more important, personally, and that is the whole issue. The first East Asian modernity provide a regional template or frame to understand this Versailles settlement and to understand the anger, the anguish, and the frustrations of this promise of possibility and the dashed dream. And then you also have the Versailles settlement, which actually a breaking point. Xu Guoqi, by the way, is a scholar who teaches at University of Hong Kong. His book about the Great War, China and Great War, is a remarkable book in the sense that he's talking about that it's the end of the Chinese naivete. China have been innocent, or the Chinese have been innocent that they should follow this hierarchy of time by modeling after the civilization standard. Now they know that no, international relations is not about civilization. Try to follow the model of civilization. It's nothing but power. Might is right. If you have right might, you're right. If you have right, you have might, then you have no right. And that whole issue comes in this Versailles settlement. And that also changed the whole motif, the template. In a way, it's a sad story. I mean, you really think about that. Okay, we're a historian, okay, we cannot turn the clock back. If have the Versailles settlement, the allies have taken more thought about Shandong, about Qingdao, or the Qingdao beer, we can continue an East Asian modernity that can blend into a global modernity. But yet, because of that, you have this rise of what Pershing Duara called the anti-imperialistic nationalism. From the 1920 on all the way to 1930, both Chinese and Japanese leaders changed their tactics, their strategy, their worldview. They become much more kind of they know that if they want to preserve their regional autonomy, they have to have a might. And to make the story more sad is that Japanese now using Chinese as a victim. I think I made a joke yesterday over dinner, is that the whole issues about might is right is that you have to be at the table rather than on the menu. And then in this case, in this East Asian modernity, okay, there are only two persons at the table, but now China become on the menu. More importantly, after Japan became the leader, Tokyo became the center of the East Asian modernity. Now is another bigger game. Japan with the other European power competing in the global scale. If we understand that way, the Sino-Japanese War, the Pacific War, all this is part of not only Japan trying to be at the table. Japan also want to be at the head of the table. So that changed the whole momentum. And the Chinese in that way have to see the whole picture from a different perspective. My paper basically is to push that issue through examining, comparing geographers' understanding of the world scene, through mapping the world. If you think about that, okay, it's the same idea, but I just say it differently. You think about that, there are these three changes in the meaning. It also meaning that the self-identity of the Chinese, okay, back to memory, is that they change identity. One is that they partake in the first group of journals that I study. Basically, they're much more broad. It's called Di Xue, the study of the earth. It's not geography. I mean, it's not Dili. Chinese was Dili. That means it's not about geography. It's about everything under the sun. So in other words, at the beginning, the Chinese are very obsessed with understanding the globe as using today's term, as a connected entity. They're interested heavily in the global connectivity. at least the relationship between China and Japan in East Asia. Remember that after the Sino-Japanese War, China's spectacular failure in the Sino-Japanese War in 1895, thousands of Chinese students were sent to Japan. As a matter of fact, the Chinese Revolution, 1911 Revolution, most of the leaders were in Japan from 1805 all the way to 1911. So Japan was somewhat like New York, in the 20th century. It's a hub of modernity. And that became the center of East Asian modernity. And that, if you push it further, that could be a part of like Indian modernity, Middle East modernity, and then connect this, all this mosaic, become a global modernity, which each region have its own autonomy and also its own particularity. But then when we go to 1920, the Tze is gone. Actually, what tragic story is that the editor, the main editor of Tze, Jiang Xianwen, he was caught into this myth of nation and global connectivity. When it was in the 1930s, when it was in here, when the Sino-Japanese War started, he talked about, he still got in his old time, he still talked about the global connectivity. He was bullied by students. In other words, to me, this is an important moment to see that the this agenda, this old devotion to global connectivity later on became irrelevant because of the rise of nationalism. This second one, the recovering of the national sovereignty, I used two journals, 史地学报 and then 史学与地学. They are much more kind of professional historians, some of them trained in the United States, came back or Europe, and then came to China, and then have organized these professional organizations. But they're now less open in terms of globality and more focused on the national sovereignty. And in that way, there's a change of mood. So in other words, scholarship, talk about Foucault, the power, the knowledge and power. Knowledge becomes a way to articulate national sovereignty, delineating the boundary. There are three cases that I study. This is Jiang Xianwen. This one that I talk about, that he missed the time. He was the old guy that booed. And this is the Tze Jiazhi. And then you think about that, the globe. When global connectivity reduced to national sovereignty is a big jump. And it also, if I say, it's a closing of a Chinese mind. That their global vision, I'm not saying they're not global, but they're now seeing the national sovereignty. That is the aftermath of the Versailles settlement. National sovereignty, and also the boundary. To fix the boundary became the most important part of the concerns. And then this is the Tze Jiazhi's editor. And many of them actually are gentry. They're educated in the much more kind of a Confucian classes. This is the second time. When the Chinese concerned about the national boundary, they focus on, they celebrate, for example, the return of Qingdao to China from Japan in the early 20s. They celebrate the Lu Xun and Dalian of the Liaoning Peninsula from Russia to China. And then they talk about Pianma. Pianma actually is middle of nowhere. It's far away in Yunnan on the border of Burma. So actually, no one even knows the place. But it became the focal point because they are now the markers, the landmarks of the boundary. The first two, Qingdao and Lu Xun, is that they got back territory. They lost. This one is on the brink, the Pianma, on the brink of losing to British. So in that way, you have this kind of it's a tedious study. You want to see it that way because what they're studying is only a tiny little piece of land. Especially Pianma, even you settle there, you have nothing to do. But the key point is that every inch of land you have to protect with blood. And that is the whole idea about national sovereignty. And that way, to me, more and more so when the Japanese started the Sino-Japanese War, it became even further. They studied in Manchuria, for example. They studied Mongolia and Tibet, not because of interest in geography, but interest in this land could have been taken away by the Japanese if you don't assert your sovereignty. One historian even rush to write a history of the Dongbei, of the Northeast, just in order to counter the argument of Japanese that the Northeast actually originally belonged to the Manchus, and because of that did not belong to China. So you have all these discussion of the racial differences in China, and therefore China could be separated and divided into different pieces. So in other words, the knowledge and power, that this study of geography is not just an academic issue, it's political. Okay, and it's so much political that someone have to risk the academic credibility to make sure that that piece of land belongs to the country. Zhu Kezhen, he's a geographer and also geologist, educated in the United States, but he wrote a lot of articles about Qingdao. Especially, in his biography, he talked about when he came back from the United States on a ship, he realized that the Japanese have studied so much about about China than the Chinese themselves. So that's why he wanted to develop a study of the geographic boundary and geology to make sure that those resources can be used. At the end of it, this is my final argument, is the hierarchy of space. This kind of a boundary setting, okay, actually signify a change of mind from the hierarchy of time, that is to say the development of civilization based on evolution, hunting and gathering, feudal society, and then industrialization. If you are located, actually, one example is that Yan Fu, one of the thinkers, he actually located China about 500 years behind time, behind Europe. He figured it out, okay, and they say that at one night, found out that China began well at the beginning as a hunting and gathering society, transitioning in the Imperial Dynasty, but stopped in 221 BC, the Qin Dynasty. From Qin to Qing, okay, 2,000 years, China stopped. How about think about that? Using today's terms, China is being fast train. So they have a fast train at the beginning, and then they finally changed to slow train, low train that only move 1 inch by a decade. And then he hoped that around 1911 they start in a fast train again to catch up with Europe. So that is the hierarchy of time. But even though it's naive from our perspective, the good thing about that is the globality. It's matching a local time with the global time, with the at least the hope that there's a sharing of global culture or global interests. Whereas the hierarchy in space that is because might is right, and the logic is that might is right, and the might derived from land. The more land you have, the more might you have. Okay, but actually, the logic is that, but it's not necessarily true. But then you compare map. Today I lose one town. Okay, tomorrow I lose another town. And for China, actually, it's a real story because and Japan invaded Northeast, and then later on the whole first the Manchuria, and then Northeast, and the Yangtze River Valley, the whole coast kind of occupied one by one. So that is the danger. Okay, when you lose, then you lose. But the hierarchy of space also a problem. Okay, you have studying, for example, the Manchuria borders. This is actually an important kind of irony. Gu Jiegang, he was a leader of the May 4 movement. He was the one who started the May 4 New Culture movement. He started a new kind of historical studies, simplifying a new way to study the past. But at the end, in the 30s, he turned around from as a symbol of the May 4 New Culture movement. He became the symbol of May 4 events. He actually devoted all his time in studying geography. And in that way, you have two examples, Jiang Shanwen, who keep the same hope, same dream, but then being booed by young people. And then Gu Jiegang changed. And then this is the line that he wrote in the beginning of his journal, okay, Yu Gong. Okay? Not allow enemy, okay, to take away an inch of our mountain and river, okay, and that encapsulated this kind of enclosure, the closing of Chinese mind. What I'm trying to say is that the May 4th movement, there are two events. If you look back to the history, okay, you have this kind of tension between the contradiction between nation states. Contradiction between hierarchy in time and hierarchy in space. If I give it further, is that look back to the member. We have scholar here, especially our friend Peter Serro. The history of May 4th from the 1910 to today, the memory actually changed many times. There's a paradigmic changes. During 1920 to 1940, the focus is on the May 4th New Culture movement, because the Kuomintang, Nanjing government, did not want to advocate radicalism, and radicalism belonged to the communists. So on that note, May 4th in the 20 to 40 only understood as one thing, New Culture movement, and continue on in Taiwan today. Okay, that is the way. And then after 1949, May 4 became, the celebration of May 4 focused on radicalism. And because that is a link from the communist historiography. So you have 1917, Russian Revolution, 1919, Versailles Settlement, 1921, established the Communist Party, all in the milieu of the May 4th events. So they inherited the radicalism, and it became the foundations of the Communist parties. And that is what they usually emphasize from 1949 all the way to 1979. It's not all, I mean, it's a broad stroke, because there are also others, like a Lu Xun. Okay, back to Lu Xun. When you celebrate Lu Xun, this Lu Xun, he's problematic, because Lu Xun, he was designated by Mao Zedong as the writer of May 4th. He could be celebrated as a critique of culture. So in other words, when you talk about having a Lu Xun conference in China, you can do both ways. You can be celebrating the May 4th, the radicalism, then your Lu Xun critiquing the society. There's a painting of a woman using a brush with Lu Xun at the back, and then writing, and then consolidating this whole idea about changing the new woman. But Lu Xun also is a new culture figure who emphasizing self-liberation. So in other words, all this is a conflicting mixture. So from the 1910, 1920 to 1940, the emphasis is on the May 4th New Culture movement. From 1949 to 1979, basically emphasizing on radicalism. But from 1979 to perhaps 2012, okay, Xi Jinping, this is what we call the 改革开放, the period of reform and opening up. The emphasis is actually more on the new culture movement, more or less kind of conversion with Taiwan and Kuomintang. Especially the mainland actually have a new context, it's modernity. So they talk about the modernity in the late Qing and the modernity after the reform opened up. Both are pluralistic, and they also bring back the hierarchy in time, because China was behind time. One of the key arguments of Deng Xiaoping in the reform opening up is that China is behind U.S. Okay, Mao wants to surpass England and then follow U.S. But that is the great leap forward. But in the reform and opening up, China clearly understood that they're behind U.S. and they have to catch up to you. In other words, they have to catch up with time in order to become part of the global community. Today, especially this year, have changed. It's not. There's a lot of how about the absence. The silence is golden. There's not much going on. Okay, and then you talk about what is sound of silence here. Well, why is not going on? This year is particularly interesting that we have so many centennial anniversary of the First World War, but there's not correspondingly centenary anniversary of the May 4th movement, regardless May 4th event or May 4th new culture movement. There's some major one actually outside of China, like at Harvard, and then in the in the academic syndicate in Taiwan. But in China, it's kind of quiet. And that is the issue. In any case, something is that the current government have a hard time, is the kind of hot potato in the hands. What May 4 you want to talk about? What Lu Xun you talk about? What kind of, because even May 4 women is important too. How to deal with that? When women now have more, actually they're much more affluent today because of the one-child policy, that women actually much better off than men. Then in that way, would you devote this May 4 movement celebration to feminism? But then on the other hand, the market if you go to China today, the market actually it's commodified women bodies. So you have this conflict. You go to a restaurant, the first one you see is a beautiful woman with qipao, okay, receiving you, and then they serve you like kings, okay, and then how you connect with this feminism. So there are a lot of this controversy because of the Chinese modernity in the past 30 years have been a commodified modernity. It's based on industrialization, but it's commodification also causing a lot of alienation, especially frustration, given the fact that there are more and more diversity and also differences in society. So that caused a lot of anxiety in today's China. Okay, and given the fact of this, well, I give it away, bell and roll system that sometimes works, sometimes don't work, that make the May 4th even a problem. If the bell and roll system work well, it should be the May 4th new culture movement. You celebrate that as part of making China be part of the world, and then now it's you have the fast train run over the European German train, so you now lead in a way. And you can change the motif of the hierarchy of time that we finally catch up with time and we actually advance in time and then become the leader. So the African country, European country, and American country, and Americas should follow us. But it's not the case. Okay? And nor they can celebrate the new the May 4th event because that's radicalism, nationalism. As you recall, in 1989, the celebration of May 4th as a nationalism led to June 4th on that year. So there's a bomb there too. You celebrate too much of radicalism. You're inviting the Beida student to go into the street, that can cause a big trouble. So how to make them, so I think what they have done is that it's just to keep silent on that and then let it go. It seems like it had been that way. The May 4th, now is the end of May, so not much going on. We'll make a couple more days to see what June 4th is about, and then we know. Okay. On that note, I will kind of finish my wrap-up. Hopefully, I can initiate some conversations. And I have a lot of friends here. All the panelists from the two panel can help me out. If I have a problem, I will call on you. Okay. Cool.
There. So I think that for those of us who have spent less time studying China, I think the significance of 1919 in Chinese history is something that isn't necessarily on our radar, and especially the importance of May 4th. And it feels like this is at some level just continuing in this process of revisionism and to some extent decentering that has to take place as we look back at this event of 1919 from where we currently stand. That is, we had the peace that never was in the peace that never was in 1916. We then had the conflict that never ended in the Middle East. And now we're learning that at some level, the consequences of what was going on in 1919, especially in the May 4th movement, had a radical impact on shaping cultural notions of modernity, notions even of the idea of territory, the birth of a kind of nationalism, and a real question about how China integrates into the rest of the world, that too becomes multiple. So you have a sort of vision that emerges immediately out of the 1919 May 4 movement that, as Jeff Wasserstum spoke about yesterday, is very parallel to 1968 in some ways in French culture and to some extent Europe and the Atlantic and the world more broadly. And then you have this other moment, which is this post-1949 moment in which you have a fundamentally different reading, and then you have since 2012, and here the silence is quite stunning, and what this means for China's relationship to the world, both as either as leader or as nation, or perhaps beyond that. So why don't we take some questions? We have about 15 minutes for questions, so we can call on people here? Thoughts? Eric?
For those of us that are less familiar with Chinese history, I'd be very interested to know a little bit about why that moment in particular was so explosive.
1919, you mean?
1919.
Oh, okay.
Why that specific event? Because I mean, China had been subject to treaty port imperialism, leasehold imperialism. So that's an interesting question to me. And is it something about the Shantung Peninsula? Is it something about Qingdao itself? Is it something about Japan as a model of modernity that's disappointing these Chinese modernizers? And then another question I had, it has to do with Japanese history, in particular about the way that the Japanese were forced to relinquish part of the Liaotung Peninsula in 1895 after the triple intervention of the Russian, French, and German powers, leading, of course, in Japan to a similar inward nationalist turn, right? So there's an interesting thing going on in Japan, which later then turns into an imperial, into a more imperial power. So these are some of my questions about that specifically.
Okay, the significance of 1919, especially why 1919, because it could be 1915, the 21 demands. It's the same thing going on. Japanese leader gave Chinese leader Yuan Shikai a list you have to follow, including agreeing on how to deal with Qingdao. So it could be 1915, it could be 1919. It could be also go back to 1895 that both Japan and China actually seem to came to the same conclusion that might is right rather than the globality. But then the key issue is that history is one thing, but memory is another thing. And today Today I'm discussing the impact of the Versailles settlement. It's the memory of the moment. In some way, 1915 and 1919 are connected. Without 1915, there would not have been this kind of explosions of popular resistance against the Versailles settlement, and also see the danger too. But at the same time, there's a nuance there. Because you're against the Allies, you're not against the Japanese. They should attack the Japanese. So for me, is the historiography afterwards that construct this May 4th movement, or broadly speaking, or much more narrow speaking, as a point of departure of a modern China, a China that is more nationalistic, much more radical, and much more devoted to new culture movement. I already talked about this confusing, but yet this is they try to remember that. And the good news is that because it's it's a multiple layers of meanings of this May 4th movement, May 4th, as an event or as a cultural movement. Every year, annually, becomes a reimagination of the past, and then integrate the present. So the political, you can have a political allegory, political commentary every year on that, and you can pick and choose which you want. And that is, to me, the more interesting thing, that what happened in 1998 and why that became so significant is one thing. But it gained more significance as times go by because of the layers of memory add to it. And now, interestingly, May 4th and June 4th are combined. So you connect, even though it only happened in 1989. 1989, but yet from now on, from that point on, May 4th and June 4th. Okay.
Priya, Satya.
That was fascinating, and there are, I think, so many parallels. That was fascinating. And there's so many parallels, commonalities. I mean, I thought of India a lot. The same obsession with defending the borders. It's slightly later. And the same catch-up. It's a very post-colonial kind of mentality. My question, though, is about the present, because as you're saying that every year there's this kind of commentary or evocation of this memory in different ways. And then this year there's this peculiar silence.
Yes.
And I get why from officialdom, silence would be sort of the favored tactic. But I'm still curious why then ordinary people wouldn't seize the moment. Would you read that as very effective repression? Or would you read that also as sort of very effective the making of amnesia, that ordinary people actually don't remember, it's not in the textbooks in a certain way, or why don't we see any noise?
First and foremost, the May 4th is a big item in the textbook. So in other words, it's being part of the curriculum in mainland China, and also now in Hong Kong too. They restructure the.
There's not a forgetting.
Okay, here's the issue is that forgetting doesn't mean, I think people remember, but when you want to remember it and how to act. So we talk about contestation, okay, how you contest, how to negotiate with power. You talk about the anti-colonialism, this subaltern activity, how do you do it? In other words, there are a lot of remembering of Wu Si, but they may fall, but they may not necessarily be now going to the public this year, because the officialdom seems to they don't like it, and they don't put money in it, because academia expect a lot of money to organize international conferences, and the only one that I went to is in Shanghai. There's basically a closed door. Only a couple of people at round table. Nobody came. So in other words, it's kind of pretty low to get it let go of the goals of May 4. Let it go. But among scholars, we still discuss it, and we know that's why I talk about sound of silence. The silence, the obscure silence, actually means something, and it may come back next year. In a vengeance, maybe 2 years later. Books are publishing on May 4th, but they may not be able to publish this year. Or you have to change, go through the censorship, you have to change some of the wording in order to publish. But usually,
Student protest at all?
Not yet. Remember, that's still June 4th. Okay, I don't know. Another thing is the authorities are very, very careful about manipulating the opinions, and that may be. The WeChat, it's not transparent. So, but they're still coding. People can still talk, but they use different way to create a different language to talk about the same thing. Since we are anti-colonial, when we share the same idea, everything there's something on the surface. There are a lot of things going on here that may pop up. Okay, this year may not be the time. Okay, I'm clear it's not the time, but next year maybe. How about that? I'm a hopeful person. Okay, never the world never ends. It go on.
Okay, well, that's maybe a wonderful way to end this discussion. Thank you once again very much for this.